Anyway, all right, so good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. So we started thinking, thank you. We started thinking about AI and personnel economics a little while ago because we could definitely see that as we think about AI, it will have an impact on personnel economics, and personnel economics will have an impact on its take-up. And so what we're doing really here is thinking about two things as a result. You know, how does the new technology affect how you run the internal part of a firm, which is the definition of personnel economics largely? And then, well, should our models change as a result? Because we have some tried and true models in economics. Oh, but I forgot I wanted to say, just so we don't think everything is Toronto-based as the origins of AI, let me remind you that the person who is said to have coined the term AI is a Professor McCarthy from Stanford in 1955. So just in case we wanted to bring it back to Stanford. All right, so let me see if I can figure out how to use the clicker. No, I turned it off. This is
just the big green one in the middle.
I see.
I'm not the only one who's struggling.
Yeah, I've never seen one like this. All right, so the outline of what I'd like to do is I'd like to talk about the topic, which of course is really the thrust of what personnel economists do, which asks the question, what makes workers productive? And then I would like to talk about how AI will interact with what we know about personnel economics to really reshape the internal strategy of the firm. And I'm going to talk about what we call the people management levers, or I will say, which is easier to say, the HR levers. And you see a list of some of them there. And then a few concluding comments. All right, so when we think about what makes workers productive, you know, really the question is, you know, is this I don't know, we found a colorful picture of what seems like AI related. Anyway, but this is a big topic, and let me really go to what I've done on people management practices for a while, which is to really emphasize that when you think about any people management practice, it must interact with other practices. And so what I've got here on this wheel is a list of things, you know, teamwork, human capital, that you have to have, which we call HR levers to run a firm. And these are interlocking in the sense that if you decide you want to have problem-solving teams elevated in your firm, in order to accomplish that, you have to do other things. And that is, you have to train people, you have to hire for more heterogeneity, you also have to reward them in such a way that they find that attractive to work in that manner. And so as we look to see how AI is going to affect any one of these levers, we have to come back in the conclusion to the point that the adoption and effectiveness of AI ultimately does have to be about how all these things do interact and support one another. All right, so here's my list again, and I'll see if I get through them all. I'm kind of aware of the time. And so the first one is hiring and promotions. And I want to cover this quickly because this is what you are all most familiar with, because you've heard about AI applications here the most, and at least I have. And so, for example, an AI tool is for screening. So you use a chatbot to, you know, screen applications. And in this case, it's an example of, you know, how much experience do you have? I have, you know, about 5 years, and that's great. The role requires 2 years. So nowadays, large firms have so many applications that they're screening with a set of questions. So that's one. So that's the topic of screening. The next is really the topic of the entire hiring process. And now there are a lot of firms offering products to enhance the productivity of the entire hiring process. So where you go from passive acquisition of people to sourcing people, all the way up to, you know, to going through the candidates and checking their referrals and making the hire. And what I want to say is we think of this in two ways. We think of this as, wow, we're going to increase the productivity of the hiring process by simply speeding it up. But the other way in which we think about it as well is that it should improve the quality of the job match. And so as personnel economists have spent many years writing models about job matching, this should be a tool that improves this in that way. The next example is reducing discrimination, in other words, as reflected in unconscious bias. I mean, that's a big thing in Silicon Valley right now. And as you know, when we first read about the AI tools for hiring, the issue was that it was increasing unconscious bias, because as the tool was the machine learning tool was being developed, reflecting, it was using, it was using the exact hiring mechanisms and outcomes to program it, and it was making unconscious bias worse because it would predict so perfectly relative to a human being. Well, now the tools are improving to try and offset that understanding that it was worse. All right, so what I want to say in sum about hiring is, yes, we've heard a lot about it. We see a lot of tools, but I want to come back to the point that it is going to both augment and change our models of personnel economics, because now when you think about the ability to screen better, you need less signaling through education. So in principle, you can screen a much wider group of people more effectively than using only, the Stanford degree to screen people. The next is, as I said earlier, better job match, then reduced discrimination and greater team heterogeneity. So these are all things we wanted to accomplish in hiring. All right, so let's move on to the next topic, which is teams and empowerment. And this is very important because organizations now believe very much in using teams to run their organizations to produce products for a number of reasons, but simply, as I sort of alluded to a moment ago, and I will show in the next slide, it's because heterogeneity of team members with more than one idea seems to improve performance. And so here's what I have in mind. This is very much like what Eric was saying about complements. So for personnel economists, we always talked about teams when you see the A, B, and C bubble, in the sense that when you form a team, you don't want to form a team of everybody from A because they just duplicate each other and therefore there's no enhanced output. What you want instead is to take people from different ellipses that reflect different skills. Now, in addition, we have AI, and in this case, AI is truly a team member. And that's different than past computerization, in which it was elevating the speed at which you did things. It was automating what you could do. But here it is a team member by really providing useful input. And as a result, what you do when you think about empowerment, here's a model of empowerment that we use. And that is, let's say the situation is the following. A group needs to make a decision. In today's world, speed in making that decision is very attractive. On the other hand, when you make quick decisions and have a number of teams who are very enthusiastic, you tend to have too many false positives. You push things forward that shouldn't be pushed forward. And so the way of doing that, of offsetting that, is, so this would be a fairly flat structure, and this is an axis which is false positives. So to reduce the false positives, you get a second opinion. And so you move up the hierarchy where there's second and third opinions, or you're just going up through a firm. Oh, this is dangerous. So that is our traditional model. But what we expect with AI is the following, which is that we should lower the rate at which we are making false positives. And as a result, can act faster and need even less reason for hierarchy. And I prefer to talk about firms because that's what I do. But very much there was an article in The Economist that talked about medicine. I mean, of course, for AI, it's very, very easy to grab people's attention with medicine examples. And in this case, it was that a young woman came into an emergency room after an auto accident, and she had, she had is it aneurysm? Anyway, she had blood in the brain that no one was catching. And 4 hours elapsed, and no one caught it, and she died. Now, what AI can do is it can do the scans of the brain very fast, and what AI can do beyond that is it can read the scans from the brain. And so in that example, they would have needed to have somebody who checked the person they would have needed to have a second opinion. One person reads the scans, a second opinion to decide what's really wrong, and that's just not the case. And so this is, the advantage of AI is it should improve the function of teams. All right, so the next, let me see, good, is that the next topic that I would like to consider for a few minutes is job design. So when you run a firm, you have to figure out how to design your jobs. Who should be a maid, who should be a manager, and then what I mean by job design is what are the tasks that should be a part of each of these jobs. So that's what job design is. And so we have designated 3 sort of types of job design. One is a star job, where the star job is a situation in which when you're doing the work, there's a possibility of big upside gains. All right, so creative work, etc. So big upside gains, many are called, few are chosen. A guardian, however, is a job in which there's only downside losses. And so the traditional examples we use for this is we think of somebody who is a pilot of a plane or a boat. So for example, some of us are old enough to remember Exxon Valdez, where all they needed to do was get the boat into port in Alaska instead of getting drunk and crashing it on the shore. And so and having an oil spill. So the idea with the guardian is there can be very big downside losses. All right, so how is AI likely to foot soldiers or all else? So, well, here's what I just said. But all right, well, how is AI likely to change this? Just sort of alter the possibilities here. Well, this is just speculation, but when we read, it's hard for us to know exactly what's going on in AI. But the old payoff distribution is the black line. So, there are upside gains, but they're rare. And now the thought is that AI will give you the ability to choose some very creative projects or things like that much more often. And, this is where I think that AI has the possibilities. Right now, we read about AI developing the ability to become curious and, to find some of these possibilities. So that's one possibility for changing the jobs of the star people. And then the next is the guardian jobs. Well, I really need to focus on the left-hand side. And that is, we already do have autopilot in planes. But autopilot in planes is going to get better and better. And therefore, you have a guardian person in the plane, but the possibility of this downside loss, should be even further diminished from the use of AI. Good, perfect. So, in other words, when you look at it, our models that tell us how to design jobs suggest that AI is really going to shape that distribution of project outcomes that we have in our typical job. Now, having said this, the other takeaway when we do job design is that these jobs should not overlap. And this is when I have to return to my circle of various things to support any one individual. when we talk about job design and we say, that's a very creative job, you therefore have a star designation in terms of job design, then you have to augment that by having pay that pays for the upside gains and does not penalize people if they have a downside loss or two, because you want them to take risks. And so for guardian jobs, you want the opposite. You don't want them to take risks, and you want to fire them immediately if they feel like they don't have the capabilities to do the job. However, with AI, their abilities are vastly augmented, but still it's a different model. And so the result is you still can't really combine these jobs typically, but maybe in the long run you could, as you have machines doing some of the work, but traditionally you have not been able to. All right, so I have two more topics. I'll see, I probably won't get through. In fact, I guess I have about 3 minutes. I wanted to talk about manager effectiveness, and maybe I won't get to pay, and I'll conclude instead. So when we think about how you have this circle, one element that we've added to the circle, that I've added to the circle over time, is that you need effective managers. And that's because we've been reading about this, since Project Oxygen at Google and, other times. And that is, to do any of these other things, you need to have managers doing their job. And the reason I mention this is because this is what's in the prediction book. And, it is, and I just want to say it's even more important with AI. Because what we're left with is, if AI is doing the basic tasks, so I think I have a slide on this. So here's some managers here that, some of you may recognize. Not the middle one. He's a star at GSB Stanford. He's a VP at Tesla. And so Elon Musk, I'm not too sure about him as an effective manager or star these days. And then this is Mark Lipscomb, who is a guest speaker in my class, and because he's worked at every great firm. And this is this TV guy that some of us know and some of us don't. And so great. So I wanted to say a couple things about managers. One is they now have better tools to do their job. There's this thing called Butterfly I mentioned here, where you get constant input on your phone from your subordinates as to how you're doing. And then they also have Xander, which looks at people's face and figures out, well, are you depressed? Are you upset? So they have better tools to do their job. But ultimately, judgment does come from people. And the literature has shown that, some, machines are going to increasingly make judgment, but a lot in personnel economics is about managing people and using judgment. And the data has shown, we're all well aware that income inequality has risen over time. It actually has also risen very much within the category of managers. Are you a manager? Income inequality has risen. So here's my non-machine learning prediction, which is I would expect that variance to further increase, because managers who are really good at working with these technologies and changing the way they run their firm and working with the human side of people are going to even, separate further and be rewarded further. All right, I'm going to skip pay, which I was going to talk about. The basic thing with pay is, because we are going to have fewer and fewer skills that are directly measurable in some absolute sense, that means that the absolute way we measure jobs, you've done this task, you've done it well, those sorts of things, you can measure these things better, but also machines are going to be doing these things. So not people. And as a result, we're going to end up using a relative scale more, which has pluses and minuses. All right, I have to move on and conclude, though. All right, conclusion. So I really want to come back to that, that wheel I developed earlier in the conclusion here. So what makes workers productive? Will AI make workers productive? Will personnel practices change? And what I see is firms say they will. In other words, if you ask a firm, is AI going to change your firm? Many say yes. Some say I'm not so certain, but there's been a few surveys about this. When you ask them exactly how, they actually are completely unfamiliar with the terminology behind AI. So they don't know that. They just know it's something out there. So when I think about this, as I said, adoption of certain AI tools could be slow. And the reason is people don't like change. They don't like it at all. And these things are interlocking. So when we think about how AI is really going to improve the internal management strategy of the firm, that is more problematic. I mean, all of us in the room easily changed when Netflix started offering us great options. We embrace that instantly. That is going to be less true within a firm. And so, so here's some adoption, curves that you guys are all used to. And so what we're really thinking about is, diffusion and adoption of the internal strategy of the firm, AI-based, could be problematic because people don't like to change and these things are interlocking. So in conclusion, here's what I want to just say. So you guys all know what this is a picture of, most of you. All right, so this is Machu Picchu. And what's interesting about Machu Picchu is when you tell your friends, I'm going to take the Inca Trail to Machu Picchu, it turns out there are many, many Inca trails, and you don't see Machu Picchu until you get to the Sun Gate. And so the takeaway from this really is, in personnel economics, when you're running a firm, a lot of people you're managing have no idea where you're going. They really don't know. And so that's another thing that's going to slow adoption. And so what you really end up doing when you make any change, and I mean, this comes back to me looking at organizational changes in HR, is you've got to tell people what's in it for me. And this is the classic example. All right, so thank you very much.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. It's a real treat to be here today with you. So I think, speaking of complementarity, this is a great session for me to be here because I study education and skills mostly, and so that's, I think, a very nice complement to some of the work that many of you guys do. So I'm definitely in learning mode today, and I'm looking forward to, I already enjoyed the first talk, looking forward to the rest of the day's talks. And I want to come at this from that perspective because I think it's actually a fruitful perspective. And the way I think about it is thoughts on the supply side. So we have a lot of work looking at how AI is going to change, how these technologies are going to change the labor market. What's really important for that is to know, okay, so different tasks are going to change, the skill mix of occupations is going to change. What are the kinds of skills we want people to have that are actually going to complement AI? How do we develop those skills? What is the role of education and training in developing the kinds of workers that can be technology AI friendly? So that's sort of what I want to talk about today. So, all right. So first of all, just a couple of comments on Kathryn's really nice paper. So I think things that jumped out to me was this sort of the point that HR practices really are complementary. You have to think about system level change, not just kind of make one change in AI and everything else will change with it. I thought that really stood out. I also really like the framing, Kathryn, of AI as being a member of the team. I think so much work happens in teams, and to think about that is, because what that means is it's not just about what AI can do, but how AI interacts with the people that are on the team. And how you make AI user-friendly is just as important as what it actually can do if somebody is using it who knows all the ins and outs. So to think of it as a team member, I think, is a really useful contribution. So mostly what I want to talk about today is the human skills that are complemented by AI. And then if we can think about what those actually are, how might we develop them? And I kind of want to start maybe slightly provocatively by saying what I think the answer a lot of people would give is, and why I think that's not quite the right answer. So I think the main instinct people have about this is that we need more STEM education, we need more STEM workers, we need more people trained in technical subjects. And what I want to try to convince you of is that's kind of half true. Okay, so if you look at data on how people who graduate from college are doing, it's very obvious. I think everybody knows this. There's an article in the Wall Street Journal fairly recently looking at average earnings of college graduates by major. And it looks like, what are the majors where you earn the most? It's STEM majors, especially what I would call applied STEM majors, so the T and the E in STEM, so technology and engineering. This is architecture, engineering, computer science, statistics, and math. A lot of the things at the top are what I would call applied, so they're basically, you're learning some job-relevant skills. Right? And the things at the bottom are things where the connection between what you learn in school and your first job is kind of less relevant. And if you look at employment rates, this is also true. People who major in STEM, especially applied STEM subjects, have very, very high employment rates after they graduate. But then if you look at an economy level, this is from a paper I wrote a couple of years ago about social skills. You can see, like, this is, so what this figure is showing you is by kind of job categories, and these are professional STEM occupations. And the zero line, if you can see here, is jobs that were exactly the same share of all jobs in the US economy in 2000 as they were in 2012. So this is looking at job categories that grew as a share of all jobs, and job categories that shrank as a share of all jobs over the last decade plus. And what you see is this is STEM jobs, and this growth is fairly modest. I mean, the scale here is 0.2, means 0.2 of a percentage point. Okay, so if you look at all STEM jobs, you can see this is a very broad category of computer science, programming, and technical support. Those jobs did grow as a share of all jobs in the US economy. It was a pretty modest increase. So about a little less than 0.2 of a percentage points. And if you add up all these categories together, it's actually negative. So jobs that the census classifies as STEM actually shrank as a share of all jobs in the US economy between 2000 and today. Okay. On the other hand, if you look at other professional occupations, which is kind of loosely defined as jobs that if you spent a lot of money to send your kid to college, you'd like for them to have. They're usually college-educated jobs that pay pretty well. Those jobs are all growing, actually. So this is not something about the Great Recession. It's not about timing. It looks like the jobs that are really growing as a share of all jobs, that are kind of college-educated, well-paid jobs, are professional non-STEM jobs. This is on the same scale. So I can't go back, but if you go back and forth, what you see is these jobs as teachers, managers, nurses, health technicians, accounting, economists, don't worry, we're fine again, social workers, physicians, college instructors, also fine again. Show up twice there. So what do all these jobs have in common? They're kind of highly skilled jobs, require a college degree, that also require interaction with people. Okay. And so that's kind of the motivate. This figure was kind of the motivation for some work that I did, like I said, on social skills. And so if you look, you can also look at this by asking employers very simply, what are the things you want college graduates to have when you hire them? So this is data from a survey by the National Association of Colleges and Employers. They give this survey every year to a broad cross-section of employers who hire college grads, and they say, look, what are the attributes you're seeking on a candidate's resume? And every year it turns out about the same. The things that are at the top, I mean, you see some things like analytical, quantitative skills, problem-solving skills, technical skills. Those rate well. But the things that are at the top are leadership, ability to work in a team, and communication skills. And that's not just true in this year, it's true in every year. And then if you look at the second thing, which is how do you actually rate the skills of people you're hiring? So the first thing is, what do we demand? And this is, what do they have? And it turns out they rate college graduates much better on problem-solving skills and analytical and quantitative skills than they do on communication and teamwork. So this is employers sending a very clear signal that there's this thing we really want, and we don't think college graduates have it. Okay. So like kind of summing up, that I don't want to summarize all the work, but one thing I showed in this paper is that the share of all jobs over the past couple of decades that require high levels of social skills, interaction, teamwork, communication grew by about 12 percentage points as a share of all jobs since 1980. So that's a big shift. And there were also relative wage gains for those jobs. So it's a demand-side story, not a supply-side story. And I think, broadly speaking, what does that mean? Today, soft skills like leadership, teamwork, ability to communicate are highly demanded and perceived in short supply. That doesn't mean that hard skills aren't important. Actually, what the work shows is that it's the jobs that require both that are doing the best. So that means, well, the way I would think about it is kind of hard skills, technical skills are necessary but not sufficient to get a good job in today's economy. And so I think the question is, how do we obtain these skills? What's the role of training in providing them? So this is some, I'm going to commit the discussant faux pas of talking about my own work too much. So that's just cards on the table there. So this is some recent work I've done with one of my students, Kathryn, looking at the return to STEM degrees over the life cycle. So this is like hot off the presses. So what is this figure showing you? It's showing you at each age the return to a STEM degree relative to a college graduate who does not have a STEM degree. So what this says is if you major in computer science or engineering at age 23, 24, you earn about 40% more than a college graduate who majors in non-STEM. That return declines to less than 20% within a decade. So STEM majors earn a lot more than non-STEM majors, but the difference between what you earn actually declines. So STEM majors have much flatter age earnings profiles than non-STEM majors. So people are catching up, basically. Why is that? So in the paper, and I won't go into the gory details, essentially what's happening is these jobs are changing more rapidly. So if you major in computer science, the set of things you learned a decade ago is very different than what you're learning today. Whereas if you majored in psychology, that is much less true. And so we actually measure this directly using data on job tasks from Burning Glass technology. Some of you guys may know Burning Glass. They collect very detailed data on job vacancy listings. And so what we actually do is calculate a rate of change for jobs and say, if you were an electrical engineer, how different was your job 10 years ago than it is today? And when we calculate that rate of change, what we find is STEM jobs do indeed have higher rates of change. And we sort of say, look, if you've got to write down a simple model to try to say, well, how is this going to affect age earnings profiles? What you get is you're going to have an immediate demand for the new workers that have the new skills, and less demand for older workers whose skills have been made obsolete. Okay? And so what do we take from that? It's not don't major in STEM, don't care about STEM, don't invest in STEM. It's that you want to think about education is doing two things. One is providing essentially high-skilled vocational education, or vocational education, job-specific skills that are valuable today on the job, and then also providing some amorphous, hard-to-define soft skills or general skills that are kind of future-proof, that are technology-proof. And we have to think about both of those things. Okay? And I think actually there's pretty good reason to believe that those kind of I'll skip that. There's kind of good reason to believe that these kind of future-proof soft skills are actually, if anything, more important in jobs that are close to the technology frontier. Because these jobs are changing, if you kind of want to stay in them and adapt, you need to be able to understand how to learn on the job, how to learn new things. And there's some sense in which getting a good education teaches you not just those things today, but teaches you how to learn them in the future and how to apply new technologies. And I think that's a really important focus for education going forward. Thank you. And so I think so we really need a better understanding of how AI and other technologies complement the human capacities we have. So I'll just kind of leave you with one provocation. This is something that frankly I'm still working through myself. And that is, I think, just to kind of name drop our wonderful host here, is talk about AI as being a drop in the cost of prediction. And they talk a lot about how prediction complements judgment. And we've talked about judgment already. So I think the question that I'm interested in asking is, what actually is judgment? What does that mean? And does education improve it? And if so, how does it? We know just by looking at data and lots of careful causal studies by many labor economists and other people that education has a causal impact on earnings and a variety of other outcomes. We know that. What we don't know is why. We really don't know the answer to that question. And my instinct, I don't know if you share it, is that it does have something to do with learning, formal education improves your judgment. And that has something to do in some sense with looking at the world around you, looking at the set of possible things you can do, and making better decisions about how to allocate your time and how to allocate resources. And that's not something that is very well captured by our kind of workhorse models in education. So that's something that I would like to work on. I would like other people, graduate students in the room, to work on as well. I don't have the answers. Thanks a lot.